So by now you have probably watched Black Panther and saw the Dora Milaje, these fierce women warriors who are the king's personal bodyguards. Or maybe you have watched The Woman King and saw the dahomey Amazons, who are also an army of all women warriors sworn to protect the king and their kingdom. These women look so awesome, beating people around and showing extreme strength and courage like never seen before. I'm sure you got so intrigued and wondered if any of this is true or historically correct. Well, turns out it is. The films portray an accurate depiction of the all-female army of the Dahomey Kingdom known as the Mino, or more commonly, the Dahomey Amazons. There's even a giant statue dedicated to their cultural significance in Benin, which was where the Dahomey Kingdom was. When Europeans came to Benin during the 17th century and saw these warriors, they were absolutely starstruck. They returned home with tales of these fierce female warriors that resembled the Amazons from Greek mythology. So they named them the Dahomey Amazons. I know, very creative. Known for decapitating their male combatants and also mutilating their genitals, today we dive into the history of these fierce goddesses, their movie depictions, and how they came to be. My name is Brian, and we make mini documentaries on global, social, and economic issues that affect Africa that you never get to hear about. So make sure you like and subscribe for more. Women warriors and rulers were not a new thing in Africa. There are numerous kingdoms with women warriors spread throughout the continent and times. However, all women armies were very rare. The Dahomey Amazons, locally known as the Mino, which translates to our mothers, were an all-female military force in the kingdom of Dahomey. The kingdom was located in West Africa in modern-day Benin. During the 1600s, the third king, King Hoeg Baja, started the group as a militia of elephant hunters. The king's daughter Hangbe convinced her father to use the group as bodyguards given their exemplary skill sets. However, scholars argue about this point and the true genesis of the Mino. One thing that the historians agree with is many kings implemented them in their armies and personal securities over the times. The Dahomey Kingdom was constantly at war with its neighbors. The neighboring Oyo Empire used to demand slaves from the Dahomey Kingdom every year for almost a century. Wait, hold up. Africans had slaves before the Europeans came? Yes, but we are getting ahead of ourselves. More on this later. The beef with the Oyo Empire and the annual demand for slaves resulted in their male population being drastically depleted. So the king turned to the elephant hunters and bodyguards into a full-fledged army to try and fight back and keep the kingdom afloat. They drastically increased the recruitment rate and training of the Mino, even recruiting kids as early as 8 years old. Many parents would give up their daughters to the Mino as it was seen as an honor. They were not allowed to have children or be a part of married life as they were considered legal wives to the king. The Mino took a prominent role in the Grand Council, debating the policies of the kingdom. They advised the king in numerous political issues and always had their opinions heard within the council. In fact, they were so honored that when they left the king's compound, they would be accompanied by a slave whose sole job was to order people to step aside and look away. Imagine having that. Serving in the Mino offered women the opportunity to rise to positions of command and influence in an environment structured for individual empowerment. The Mino were also wealthy and held very high status. The Mino trained with intense and extreme physical exercises. They learned survival skills and they were trained to conquer the fear of death and were known to tolerate immense pain. They were such stone-cold warriors that some of their training tactics were just unimaginable. This included storming acacia thorn defenses and executing prisoners in military exercises. They would even conduct jungle expeditions with no equipment or weapons. I mean, these chicks were just insane. And this was just training. They were constantly tested in death and fear tactics, and discipline was a large emphasis of their training. The Mino received benefits that their male counterparts did not. For example, they were allowed to eat and drink in the king's compound, whereas the men were not. By the mid-19th century, they numbered between 1,000 and 6,000 women, about a third of the entire Dahomey army. They conducted multiple raids and were even victorious in many wars with neighboring kingdoms throughout the 1700s. This made them a force to reckon with when the European invaders came. At first, the French and the Dahomey Kingdom were actually buddies. They had a friendship treaty in 1851 that allowed the French to conduct missionary and commercial operations throughout the kingdom. However, that friendship did not last long. The kingdom was at its peak in the late 1800s and started becoming at odds with the French and other nations due to treaties being signed without their backing. The last strike was when the state of Porto Novo, a tributary to the Dahomey Kingdom, agreed to get French protection in 1863. This, of course, pissed off the Dahomey because they saw Porto Novo as one of their most important states. This resulted in the Dahomey army, most prominently the Mino, conducting multiple raids against states that had deals with the French. A well-documented incident depicts how much the Dahomey hated the French. In March 1889, Dahomey attacked a village on the Dahomey Valley that was under French protection. The chief confidently stated that the flag of the tricolor would protect him. Amino was then commanded to behead the chief and wrap his head with the flag. While the Dahomey were raiding other tribes and kingdoms, the French were stockpiling arms and soldiers from colonial states, preparing for the inevitable war. They responded by taking over the Dahomey port of Cotonou and fortifying themselves there. This marked the beginning of the First Franco-Dahomeyan War, which the French were very well prepared for. The French fought 2 wars with the Dahomey Kingdom, and they inevitably won due to their firepower, colonial benefits, and alliances. They were shocked by the courage the Mino possessed. The Mino are reported by the French to have fought the hardest throughout the wars, charging out of their trenches and leading audacious, high-risk attacks. However, they were always outgunned by the French. The French killed thousands of the Dahomey army, which resulted in the destruction of the Dahomey Kingdom. The French soldiers, however, commended the Mino and said that they fought with courage. One thing the movies don't show is the Dahomey's involvement in the slave trade. The multiple raids that I mentioned the Mino were involved in were mostly slave raids. As a highly militaristic kingdom constantly organized for war, it captured children, women, and men during wars and raids against neighboring nations and sold them into the Atlantic slave trade in exchange for European goods, such as rifles, gunpowder, fabrics, cowrie shells, tobacco pipes, and alcohol. You know, they had to wash away all that pain from killing all those people with alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs, I guess. All the extra prisoners became slaves in the Dahomey, where they usually worked in royal plantations. In fact, most powerful kingdoms in Africa were involved in the slave business, which played a huge part in the Dahomey Kingdom's economy. The Dahomey Kingdom had too many slaves and prisoners of war that they would sacrifice them in large scale annually during the festive celebrations known as the annual customs of Dahomey, as part of the Vodun religion. Fun fact, that's where the term voodoo comes from. There are occasions where they would sacrifice thousands of prisoners and slaves when a king died, that the whole town would be covered in human blood. But before we start jumping into conclusions, we have to understand that our 21st century understanding of slavery and war prisoners is not similar to their 17th century version. For example, slavery was a very common practice all over the world at that time. When a kingdom was at war with another kingdom, they usually saw their enemies as less than. If one kingdom won a battle, for example, they usually would take the prisoners as slaves. Even the Romans were known to take Northern Europeans as slaves and did multiple public executions of prisoners during festivals. However, most African slaves were allowed liberties like creation of wealth and even owning other slaves. So when a strong kingdom like the Dahomey had a surplus of prisoners, they would unfortunately kill them in the name of religion. Now, I am not stating this to justify any type of slavery or human sacrifices. I'm just trying to put things into perspective. All in all, the Dahomey Amazons were a force to be reckoned with. They serve as great examples of strong women fighting for the good of their kingdom. Sometimes their kingdom may have messed up ways, but they rode along and made sure their kingdom's glory was identified and recognized by any means necessary. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Brian, and I hope you subscribe for more like this.